Her pastoral retreat work for people in 12-step programs has brought her to a variety of places, including Ireland, Hong Kong, and Thailand. She is now the director of the Sisters House in Tampa, Florida. The Sisters House is a former convent repurposed to become a location to support women involved in recovery. And I believe you can see the link and find out more about the Sisters House in the chat. Sister describes the Sisters House not as a halfway house, but as a safe space for women in recovery to tend to their spiritual lives. We are very excited to have Sister Cathy join us tonight for her presentation titled, Not the Spiritual Journey I Expected. That is an inquisitive title. Please join me in welcoming Sister Cathy Cahill. Thanks for joining us, Sister. Turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. I'm glad you like that title. I'm grateful to Matthew for inviting me. And it was quite a few months ago, and then maybe about 3 months ago, he followed up with an email and said, "What's the title for your talk?" And I was like, "Title for my talk? Okay." And your emphasis on honoring the sacred journey led me to the title. This spiritual journey that I've been on in recovery is not the one I expected when I started out on any kind of a spiritual path. I was very happy to, I wasn't able to come Tuesday, but last night hearing Bill and Lauren and then Jeff a while ago, it's just such a wonderful variety. And as I was listening to Jeff, our stories couldn't be much more different in so many ways. But the thing that was the same had to do with, he said he couldn't predict what would happen when he drank. And that's kind of what happened for me. And so just to give a little bit of background, that, I entered the convent. I'm a Franciscan sister. I entered the convent right after high school. And I was drawn to the Franciscans. I had two different communities of sisters in elementary school and high school. And I went to a parish priest and I said, "I think I want to join the convent, but I don't want to be," and I named the other two, which shall remain nameless, that I didn't want to be. And one of them, I had a sister and an aunt in that community. And I think some of it was I didn't want to go through life being Mary Cahill's sister and Sister Marie's niece. And and so he said, "Well, look around." And he told me about some different communities. And I don't think I had read the entire life of St. Francis. I don't think I got to his conversion, actually. And it was, well, if this guy's a saint, this is pretty cool. He was kind of a wild young man. And not that I was that wild, but so that appealed to me. And then the Francis whole approach to life of looking for God, as Ignatius did, finding God in all things, but seeing that if we want to grow closer to God, we just need to look around us at the wonderful creation that God has given us. So that kind of appealed to me, but nothing. I didn't feel like I was on this big spiritual journey. However, in entering the convent, I was certainly had that desire. It wasn't unusual in 1961. So now you can figure it out how long I've been in the convent. Went to an all-girls Catholic high school, came from an Irish Catholic family in New England. And so it wasn't unusual to go in the convent. And I always say to people, the important question is, why do you stay? But that's for another time. But anyway, my drinking in high school was very minimal, actually, but it was marked by I could drink more than the others and not show it. And that's symptom of alcoholism, the high tolerance. But I didn't, we were the uh, not wild, but um, the ones acting out if we skipped class and went to the donut shop and drank coffee and smoked cigarettes. I mean, that was as wild as we got, or as I did anyway. And probably had I been going through high school about 10 years later, it would have been different. But anyway, that's how it was for me. And I came from a family where there was a lot of drinking and a lot of alcoholism. And some of them were more pleasant when they drank than when they weren't drinking. And so I didn't have this notion of Skid Row bum or that type of thing. And I don't know as I was calling it alcoholism, but I knew that there was a lot of drinking. And probably some of my entering the convent was to get away from that and in a very respectable way, in the convent, get thee to a nunnery. So, and it's not why I stayed. So that's the important part. And I don't know as I had an idea of what spirituality meant, but I certainly wanted to do good and to be good. And I guess I knew that that kind of a journey then would be, uh, reading the Gospels or reading the scriptures and the lives of holy people and looking at the people who had gone before me, and then I would be, what I was supposed to be. Um, the what Jim didn't say, and I guess I didn't tell him that for the early part of my life as a sister, I was a teacher and then a principal of a school, excuse me, of schools, different ones. And uh, in the convent, when I say I entered the convent 3 months after I graduated from high school to the day, um, the convent was not a big drinking scene. I hate to disappoint you if you were waiting for that wonderful story, but it wasn't. And I didn't have anything to drink like for 3 years. And then I could go home on vacation. And so when I went home on vacation, then I could drink because everyone else was drinking, and that was it'd be more abnormal not to drink. Before I entered, like the kids couldn't drink, and I didn't drink at home when I was in high school at all. But now I'm home as an adult. I mean, wrapped up in 9 yards, literally, of so I must be an adult. So, and my drinking immediately was marked by blackouts. The one of the first nights I was home, my mother and I playing cards at the dining room table and drinking 16-ounce cans of Narragansett beer. And the next thing I knew, it was the next morning, and I was in the back bedroom waking up and had no recollection of having left the dining room. And now I think normal people would say, "Oh my goodness, do I have a brain tumor or something?" But I think I intuitively knew it had something to do with 16-ounce cans of Narragansett. And but I was only home for a couple of weeks, and then I was back to the convent. And again, there wasn't much. I was talking to one of our older sisters a couple of years ago, and she said, they used to bring out a bottle of wine for 16 people. And it was like, why bother dirtying the glasses? There wasn't much. However, I always sat near people who didn't drink so I could have theirs too, which, normal drinkers wouldn't have to do. But anyway, um, and as time went on, the opportunity to drink became greater. And like I was doing the buying, for example, and at one point I was stationed in Carthage, Mississippi in the 60s. and we had a pastor who was an alcoholic who was always bringing stuff over to the convent, and I was very happy to, um, you know, partake of his hospitality, and so, um, I would say that my drinking was marked by, I couldn't predict what would happen once I started, because sometimes it was fine. I would just have a drink or two, and that's all I intended, and it worked. And then other times it didn't, and I couldn't predict when that. Probably if I could predict when that was going to be happening, I'd still be drinking, because I just wouldn't drink on the days it was going to go bad. Um, but time went on. I was in different places, and then in 1979, it all kind of came to a head. I was stationed in Utica, New York, and I had a blackout, and it's almost like the Jews at Passover. It's like, how was this night different from any other night? How was this blackout different from any other blackout? But it really got my attention for a couple of reasons. One was, most of my drinking had been by myself, in my room. I wouldn't keep alcohol in my room, because I had heard about these alcoholic nuns, and they kept booze in their room. So I figured, if I don't keep booze in my room, I'm not an alcoholic. It made perfect sense to me. Excuse me, but I had a pathway beat to any place where we had it, in the dining room or the refrigerator or wherever. And but this particular night, I was not at home. I was at a friend's house, and when I went in, she said, "Would you like some scotch?" Which was my preference, and I said, "Yes, just one. And if I ask for a second one, don't give it to me." Now, normal people don't have to talk like that. Um, and so I had one, and I asked for a second, of course. And of course, she gave it to me. And according to her, I didn't even finish the second one. I had no recollection until I woke up the next morning, having been sick through the night. People die this way, and no memory of having come home or coming back. I was just down the block, but and it really got my attention and frightened me, and uh, it, it just was like that, what anything could have happened, and it didn't. But I called her, and she said, "Oh, you were walking and talking, making as much sense as usual," which probably wasn't an awful lot, but and I went to Providence shortly after that, and I was very careful not to drink, but I did a couple of times and just had a couple of beers, and because I didn't think I could eat clams and not drink beer, and we had gone out for clams, so, but I just had a couple. And on the way home, oh, before I went to Providence, I had made a call to um, my spiritual director, and I'll go back to how important I think that the role of that person is. And he was out of town because it was August, and uh, he was up at his camp in the northern part of the state. And then I remembered that there was a Jesuit priest in Syracuse that someone told me was a recovering alcoholic. I had only met the man once, who did a mission at our parish. And someone had told me he was a recovering alcoholic. So I called him, and he was out of town on vacation. So I tried. And so then I went to Providence, and I'm like, I overreacted in making those phone calls. But coming back, driving back to Utica, I was on 95 leaving Providence, and I was trying to figure out how to drive the car off the road, have it look like an accident, finish me off. I didn't want to, survive this, but not take anyone else out. It had to be no other cars, I was like, this is crazy. And I called out to God for help. And what came to me was follow through on that call. that you made to the Jesuit in Syracuse. And I said, okay, I will. And at that moment, there was a certain peace. It wasn't like, oh, everything was fine, but it was like, okay, I'll do that. I'll follow through on that phone call. And I did. And he said to me, of course, by this time, I know I'm overreacting. So I started telling him everything else that's going on in my life that's just terrible. Like my mother was in early stages of some kind of dementia. I I didn't get along with the pastor, and a teacher had resigned, and oh, what was I gonna? I can't cope. I can't cope with anything. I can't cope with my mother's situation. I can't cope with this school situation. Can't cope with the pastor. I just can't cope with my friends. And he said, Cathy, you don't know me. You came to me. I think maybe alcohol's in here someplace. And I said to him that night, Paul, I'm scared stiff. I'm an alcoholic. And he said, you have no idea what a grace that is. And what I said back to him, I won't repeat here, but I didn't see it as a grace. And it didn't take me long to realize what he meant, that just breaking through denial enough to say that was a great grace. And he said, I don't know if you are or not. I don't know you. And he started the 20 questions, which I passed with flying colors, except I had never lost a job. Nuns don't. But I hadn't lost a job. I hadn't been in the hospital, but I was only like 35 years old. And but yeah, not being able to predict what would happen was the big one for me. And he said, it sounds like you've got a chronic progressive fatal illness. And if you don't do something about it, you're going to kill yourself. Kill yourself did not get my attention. What got my attention was chronic progressive, because I knew what they meant. It meant it wasn't going to go away and it was only going to get worse. And I had living examples in my family of what that was like. And there were a couple of people in my family who were in AA, my brother and an aunt who was more like a sister to me. She was the same age as my brother. And I said, I'm afraid you're going to tell me I have to go to AA. And he said, I'm not going to tell you you have to do anything, but you can't do it alone. So, well, I know that. I'll pray. I need God's help. I'll pray. Did I mention I'm a nun? But anyway, he said, you need to have other people. And he offered to take me to a meeting. He was speaking that Sunday at a breakfast meeting, and he picked me up and took me to it. And I sat there listening to him, of course, shaking like crazy because I haven't had a drink since Thursday. And listening to him, thinking, thank God there's a place like this for people like him. And the other people there were very nice to me, and I didn't want them to be nice to me. I didn't want to have anything to do with them. I just was. And so, but I went. And then my spiritual director came back in town, so I went to see him, and I'm sure he's going to say to me, that guy thinks everyone's an alcoholic because he is. So not you, dear. Just pray more. And he said, oh, that makes so much sense. He said, I was thinking I'm going to talk to her about her drinking, because I would say something like, when that happened after a couple of Rob Roys or whatever. And I was thinking that was going to be my out. And so he introduced, this man was not an alcoholic himself, but he introduced me to someone who brought me to a meeting. And I went, and I didn't like it, and then I went to some other meetings and I didn't like them. I thought maybe it'd be like PTA, you go once a month, it'd be cool. And finally I went to back to him for spiritual direction, maybe a month or two later. And he said, "How's it going?" I said, "Terrible." And he said, "What's wrong? Did you drink?" And I said, "No, I haven't drank, but I don't want to go to those meetings, Bill. I just I don't like them. I don't want to go." And he said to me, and this is where the spiritual direction is just so important. And I hadn't been honest with him about my drinking. Might have said one or two things, but I didn't tell him I was concerned about it or anything before this. And but he said to me, "Cathy, if Jesus Christ walked in the room right now and said, 'Come follow me,' you'd go after him because that's what your life has been about. And what if he's calling you through AA? Don't you think you ought to follow?" And I stopped fighting that night. And I had already asked someone to be my sponsor because that's what you were supposed to do. And but I started talking to her and started doing the steps and working the steps. And you know, that's kind of what it used to be like and what happened. Um, and and then when I say it's not the spiritual journey I expected, when I really opened my mind and my eyes and my heart to to what was happening, was I found out that what this spirituality was a very down to earth spirituality, that it wasn't something that, you know, the steps were written after some people got sober and stayed sober for a while, not a long time, but for a while. And and then they said, you know, we're going to write this down. What have we done? Oh, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Our lives have become manageable. Okay, write that down. You know, and so it was very practical and down. It wasn't someone coming up with how can we get alcoholics sober? Um, you know, let's write these rules for them. It was this is what they did. It was very practical and very real. And so it was a spirituality that was down to earth, and people that had dealt with the real life condition of the inability to stop drinking or the inability to predict what would happen when they drank, which was for myself. I mean, I wanted to say I couldn't be an alcoholic. Like I did say to this Jesuit in Syracuse, um, well, I was just in Providence, and I only had a couple of beers when we went out for clams. I had a couple of beers. And he said, "Did you have to think about that, about having only a couple of beers?" I go, "Yeah." I mean, I was like, "I'm only going to have a couple of beers." He said, "Do you ever drink milk?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, I drink milk." He said, "If you have a glass of milk, do you say, 'I'm only going to have one glass of milk. I'm only going to have one glass of milk'?" I said, "No, that really has never crossed my mind." And he said, "That's how normal people drink alcohol. You know, they drink and that's it, you know." And so, you know, I wanted to say, "Oh, I'm not that bad," or I didn't get a DUI. By God's grace, I wasn't driving when I was drinking. Um, and so that's trying to be different. You know, I was trying to say my life wasn't unmanageable. I was at that time I was principal of a school. I was well thought of in my community, and I was hiding all this what was going on with me. Um, and and then I was like, okay, the unmanageability is on the inside. And then maybe only about 10 years ago, I heard someone say something that really rang true. And she had gone through treatment, and she her story was that she would get up in the morning, a shower, get dressed, go to work. Worked, had a big job in Washington, D.C., moved up uh, in her department, whatever it was, come home in the evening, drink herself into oblivion, get up in the morning, shower, dress, go to work. And so she was in, I forget how she got to treatment, but anyway, she told her counselor, I was managing and my life wasn't unmanageable. And rather than arguing with her, this counselor that she had said, okay, it wasn't unmanageable. How about unbearable? And that resonated with me. It was like, yeah, my life back then wasn't, I mean, that it was unmanageable on the inside, but I was managing, I was controlling everything on the outside, but it was unbearable. And so that practical down to earth spirituality, that it takes our experience, and that's what we look at. It was also a spirituality of surrender, um, and an abandonment to God's will. We not only admit powerlessness, but reliance on a power greater than ourselves. And then making that decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of that God was, that's an incredibly profound spirituality of surrender. Um, and, I thought I had that down. I had a ring to say, I've taken vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, all the days of my life. Tell me something that doesn't cover. You can put it in the chat if you can come up with something. But so I've got that one taken care of. And that turning my will and life over to the care of God, that it was going to be God's will and God's way of my becoming holy, if you want to call it that, or having a spiritual path. It was going to be God's way. It wasn't going to be Cathy Cahill's way. And not that there was anything wrong with the spirituality of, obviously, I mean, I'm still a Franciscan sister after all these years. And that spirituality is rich and profound, and nothing in the 12-step spirituality would be in conflict with it. But this total surrender, to seek to know God's will. When Bill said to me that night, if Jesus Christ walked in the room right now and said, come follow me, you go after him, what if it's through AA? My way would have been, me and God and the sunlight coming through the stained glass windows, and I would make all the right retreats and hang out with all the right people and read all the good holy books, maybe get to Assisi. That'd be lovely. And then I would be this good Franciscan. And it's like, no, how about church basements in Utica and New Hartford and Clinton, New York, and with this group of people? It's like, really? So it's God's way, not mine. So it's that kind of a spirituality of surrender. And then it's also a spirituality of honesty and humility. The honesty that's called for when we say we're going to take a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. It calls for honesty and humility. I don't worry too much about humility. I think if I did, I'd be very proud of how humble I am or something. But anyway, there was a man in my first home group. My first home group sounded like the beginning of a really bad joke. There was an atheist, this was Bill, that I'm going to quote in a minute. There was an agnostic, Jack, who was my sponsor's husband, and he was an agnostic. I used to tell him he was a fallen away agnostic because he talked about God a lot. And then his wife, my sponsor, I asked to be my sponsor because I didn't know what religion she was, but I knew she wasn't Catholic from something she had said. And I didn't want someone who either thought nuns were just the most wonderful thing in the world, or they had had bad experience and I was going to suffer for her, getting slapped on the knuckles when she was in second grade or something. So, but what I found out 2 weeks after I asked to be my sponsor was that she was studying to be a deacon in the Episcopal Church. So This is the home group. I mean, there's other people in it too. And but Bill White was the atheist, and he used to say when we would start talking about humility, that humility is not something you work on, it's something you back into. And I really believe that's true in this spirituality, that if you admit powerlessness and unmanageability, if you believe that you need a power greater than yourself, if you're willing to make that decision to turn your will and the life over to the care of God, and you take this honest, searching, and fearless moral inventory and admit that to God and to another human being, yourself, God, and a human being, the result is humility. And I think the result is something that Jeff referred to as compassion for others. You know, if we don't become more compassionate toward other people when we do our own fourth and fifth step, I wonder what's going on. So we you know, we're honest, we admit when we've harmed others, we continue to take inventory. So it's that spirituality of honesty, and then I think the result of that is humility, because we realize we've got a lot to be humble about. Um, what I found on this spirituality that I wasn't expecting was it was a spirituality of accepting responsibility, that we have to make amends uh, for people that we have harmed, except when to do so would injure them or others. But we have to take responsibility for that. We have to clear up the wreckage of the past, and ongoing amends. You know, the when the 10th step says we continue to take personal inventory, that we're looking at ourselves and taking responsibility for that. And it's a spirituality of love and service. I mean, even when you listen to the prayers of that are found in the literature for AA, and there are similar ones in others, but the third step prayer, I offer myself to you to build with me. It says thee, but I have trouble with that. I offer myself to you to build with me and to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Why? So that I'll be happy, joyous, and free? No. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them will make me happy, joyous, and free? No. That victory over them may be a witness to those I would help of your power, your love, your way of life. May I do your will always. So it's that spirituality of right away. I mean, we're only on the third step, and we're praying that I might be a witness to those I would help of God's power, God's love, God's way of life. So the assumption immediately is you're going to be of service to other people. You're going to have to go out of yourself. In the seventh step prayer, the seventh step is, well, the sixth is we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character, which to me was a huge relief, because I always thought if there was something wrong with Cathy Cahill, I had to fix it and I had to work on it. And the simple wisdom of the spirituality of the 12-step program says, no, you are entirely ready to have God remove that. And then the seventh, we humbly ask God to remove it. The prayer for that, my Creator, I'm now willing that you have all of me, the good and the bad. I mean, we could spend the whole evening on that. Remove from me every single defective character, if I were writing it, that makes me look bad or feel bad. But the suggestion in the book is remove from me every single defective character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and to others. So it's a spirituality of service. I've got to be of use to other people. I have to, you know, be of use to God in God's continual creation, God's transforming people I'm going to be part of that. I love the transformed people transform others. It reminded me of the opposite of it, hurt people hurt people. And so people who have been healed of those hurts can be a healing um, instrument for others. People who have been transformed by all of this can help with the transformation of others. Um, so that came to my mind. So it's in that prayer, we want things removed that are going to stand in the way of my usefulness to God and to others, and then grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Um, and I always say that if like excuse me, um, the people say, well, my character defects haven't been removed. Well, are you drinking? No. Well, the ones that were keeping you drinking obviously had been removed. And so maybe they're not standing in the way of your usefulness to God and to other people. Even if it's just, well, I better do something about that. I'm going to end up like her, that could be useful in some way. Um, and so it gets the emphasis off ourselves. St. Francis told his followers one time, stop looking at yourselves in your own sinfulness and look at the good God who loves you. And that's what this seventh step says to me. It's don't put the emphasis on yourself and your character defects and your shortcomings and your failings and all of that. Put your emphasis, look to God, and that's uh, and so that spirituality of you're going to be there for other people, love and service, and maybe that love and service is simply setting up chairs at a meeting. I mean, it used to be, cleaning ashtrays, but thank God we're not doing that as much anymore. But maybe it's just setting up the chairs or bringing the cookies or making coffee or something like that. And it gives people an opportunity to do that. The love and service of listening that Jeff was talking about, that those um, priests listened to him. And the when I first came in, I don't remember so much of what people said to me. I do remember how they were with each other, and that appealed to me, that they were so accepting of each other and of me, um, now, not when I very first came in, because I didn't want any part of it, but once I let down the uh, resistance, then that's what I noticed, how they were with each other. It's a spirituality that I wasn't looking for, one of paradox, although one of our great saints in the Franciscan tradition talks about it all the time, Bonaventure. But we do have a spirituality of paradox. We surrender to win. What? You know, we have to give it away to keep it. Well, that's a paradox. We suffer to get well. We die to live. Um, that's that spirituality of paradox. I found it to be a spirituality of gratefulness, the emphasis on developing an attitude of gratitude. To you, almost sick of hearing that phrase, but um, but that that emphasis on looking at what you have and being grateful for it, and it not being enough to just say that we're grateful, but that we have to act grateful. That and Jeff was talking about um, that acting grateful is essential. It's not just enough to say thanks, but we have to do thanks. And for me, like showing up at a meeting is part of doing things. I'm grateful for the people that were there when I came in. I'd hate to think what my life would be like if my first sponsor, Marty, had decided after 18 years she didn't need it anymore. but she was there for me. And so I want to be there for other people. And that's how we act grateful, by showing up. It certainly is a spirituality of living in the present moment. That one day at a time, when I first came in and saw the slogans on the wall, one day at a time, first things first, think, be but for the grace of God, I thought, oh, is this the best they can do? I was like, these are so corny, and so now I think it's a compilation of the greatest wisdom of the, centuries. But that, keep it in today. That we hear that all the time. And when I first came in, that was important to me. If I don't drink today, I'm not going to get drunk today. If I don't drink today, I'm not going to have a blackout today. And just keep it in today. I couldn't imagine never drinking again. But you don't have to imagine never drinking again. Just don't drink today and you'll be fine. And I can remember one time being at a meeting where relapse was kind of the topic. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm probably going to relapse, so I might as well do it and get it over with, which just meant I still wanted to drink. And but then someone said, it doesn't have to be pot. Certainly people relapse, and we welcome them back, but it doesn't. If you don't drink today, you're not going to relapse today. It's like, oh, write that down. If I don't drink today, it's like keeping it in today. And, fast forward, a good number of years now, it's like it's still important for me to keep it in today. I can beat myself up that I haven't done better. It's like, well, do better today. That's all. Just let it go. Um, and again, St. Francis would have said it in different words. Up till now we've done nothing. Let's begin. It's like, I've done a lot. No, well, let that go. Begin today. Um, and so that living in the present moment, staying in today. And in some of those prayers that we use, the serenity prayer, one of the best lessons I ever got on prayer was from this agnostic, Jack. And it was maybe November. I had come in August, and this was November. And I can remember looking out the window, it was snowing in New Hartford, New York. And they were talking about accepting God's will, and they were talking about the serenity prayer. And I'm like, I had had people held up to me as models of accepting God's will, and they were miserable. And in the serenity prayer, it was like, yeah, I knew it. And I said, I've probably done it and counted cross stitch, I know the prayer. But I don't get what you people were saying, which was really unusual for me, because up till then, if I didn't know what they were talking about, I would just kind of nod knowingly and, not say anything. But that night I did say, I don't know what you're talking about. And Jack said to me, he said, Cathy, I'm kind of embarrassed to talk to you about prayer, but you obviously don't know what it is. Now, had been in the convent 18 years at that point, and Jack had been sober 18 years. And so I waited for the next line to come. He said, it's a prayer, Cathy. You do not have serenity to accept what you can't change. You don't have courage to change what you can. And it's quite obvious you don't have wisdom to know one from the other. So you need to ask for it. Now, that is so simple. But I think I had thought I should have, I've been sober for 3 months. I mean, I should have serenity, courage, and wisdom. I was a nun, for God's sake, And I should have serenity, courage, and wisdom. And it's like, no, you don't have it. And so it's a prayer. You need to ask for it. Best lesson on prayer petition, anyway, that I ever had. Before I left Utica, I did the serenity prayer and counted cross stitch for Jack and his wife. But that simple attitude toward grant me, you give it to me. You know, the prayer that's known sometimes as the prayer of St. Francis, or the peace prayer, is in the 12 and 12. And again, it's like, Lord, make me a channel of your peace. You make me, not I will be. And I think I mean, certainly I had seen that prayer a few times before I got to AA. And it was it in my head, and I wouldn't have verbalized it that way, but it was like, I will be a channel of your peace. Where there's hatred, I will bring love. Where there's injury, I'll bring pardon. Where there's doubt, I'll bring faith. And God knows, where there's sadness, I'll bring joy. And it's like, no, we're asking God to do that. So it's that kind of a spirituality that says, I can't do this by myself. I need God's help, and I need other people. I was saying that one time at a retreat, and this woman said, and it was, oh my God, it was a great line. She said, oh, so what you're saying is it's a prayer, it's not a mission statement. I said, exactly, exactly. Because I think I had, kind of, I'm sure I don't know, have it here, but I had on my wall someplace as a mission statement, I will be an instrument of God's peace. It's like, no, God, make me an instrument of your peace. And so that's the spirituality that I found in coming to AA. In not that it took the place of, or that I got rid of anything else. It didn't. There was nothing in conflict with my Franciscan spirituality, with the Catholic spirituality. There was nothing in conflict with it. It all went together. And as Jim had mentioned, I eventually got into retreat work, and that happened because I did my fifth step with someone that I was sure I would never see again as long as I lived, uh, which I thought was kind of a good thing. And it was a Franciscan priest who happened to be at the same place. I had never met him before. He was at our retreat house in Tampa, and at that time I was in Utica. I had no idea of ever going back to Florida. And so I did my fifth step with him, and he was in recovery. I didn't know that when I asked someone about him, and oh yeah, he's got like 17 years. Okay. And so I thought, I'll never see him again. Well, of course, I ended up down here in Tampa next door, and had 5 meals a week with him and all of that. And he had started retreats for people in 12-step programs here at the retreat house here. And he asked me to give a talk one afternoon and on the retreat. And then eventually then he was sick, and he asked me to do the retreat for him. And that's kind of how I got into retreat work. And I was still, by this time, I had gone to study alcoholism counseling. So I was working in treatment centers. I worked with the homeless in Boston. I wish I had known Bill Creed and the Ignatian spirituality program at that time, because I was working with the homeless and, didn't know what to do. But then I had started doing retreat work, and then ended up as director of the retreat house, and continued to do retreat work because of the encouragement of this person that I thought I'd never see again. And then, that, I think what helped me with that, by doing that, was it kept me fresh. It kept me, paying attention to making sure I was doing what I was talking about doing. Um, the 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 folks who come to retreat, for the most part, are on this spiritual journey. They want more. They want, to improve their conscious contact with God. And, I think the wisdom of the 12-step spirituality doesn't say that we use prayer and meditation to get a conscious contact with God. It says that we use prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. And so what's in that is the contact with God is there. It's at God's initiation, God, the fact that we're breathing, whoever gives us life and breath, and obviously most of us on this would say God. But that power greater than ourselves who gives us life and breath is in contact with us by the fact that we have life and breath. And so what we use prayer meditation to improve that. And what the 12-step spirituality gives us is a very practical way to do it in the 10th step, where we continue to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admit it. It doesn't say if, it's when. We're going to be wrong. And over the years, that has become so much more to me than just, oh, when I'm wrong, I admit it. But what's going on in my life? The examine, as Ignatius would call it, that we're looking at our lives. And I think it's Merton who said it's, contemplation, prayer is the real me before the real God. And so the me, the 10th step, gets me in touch with the real me. The real God is whoever the real God is. The real me is the one that what's going on in my life today? What's happening today? Where did I find God today? Why am I so upset about that? What's going on with me there? And then going to God with that, 10 and 11 belong together. And actually, when you're reading it in the big book, it's hard to tell which one they're talking about. But that's a kind of spirituality that I found here. I wasn't looking for that. The spirituality of my faith would say that strength is made perfect in weakness. We see that in the scriptures. And then I walk into an AA meeting and I see it in living color. That, there's a quote, I've read that it was Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA, who said it. Someone else says it was a father, Bill Wilson in California. It doesn't matter. But the quote is, I want to remind myself and anyone who would hear that AA is not a personal success story. It is instead the story of our colossal human failures now turned into the happiest kind of usefulness by the divine alchemy of the living grace of God. And so that spirituality that says we take what is our colossal human failures, and it turns out that's what's useful. Our stories are what we have and what we share with each other. And I think it's a very generous act. I think, the quote, no greater love has this than anyone, no greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Well, I always thought that meant if I'm walking down the street with someone and the bus is coming and I push her out of the way and, here we go, or I stand in front of the bullet or something. Well, that's probably not going to be asked of me. However, I think when we tell our stories, we're laying down our life for our friends. And that the other thing I wanted to just mention, and last night I saw that it was in the questions, and then tonight it came up again about spiritual direction and how important it is in recovery. And I think that is, my experience has been that that I have a sponsor whom I talk to, but having someone trained in spiritual direction and trained in, helping me to look at my life and what God is doing in my life, and how the promise from God is being fulfilled in my life, that spiritual direction is extremely important. And that spiritual direction I had when I didn't want to go to AA, I was like, no, I don't want to do this. And Bill saying to me, Jesus Christ walked in, you can go after him. So how about that way? Really? I mean, wasn't there a loftier, easier, softer maybe way that I can do that? So I would just want to emphasize that and then the retreat work that you all are doing is just so important. Is Jeff was saying that people know that they're being listened to. And I would just encourage you that who are involved in retreat work, that you're taking care of yourselves. If you're in a 12-step program, you're doing that for yourself. When I was studying alcoholism counseling, when I went off to do it, I was leaving Utica. I was going out to Chicago to study at Lutheran General, and some of the people in my home group were saying, people become alcoholism counselors and they get drunk. I'm like, oh, no, that can't be true. And then when I got there, one of the people that was our instructor said, you might have heard that alcoholism counselors get drunk. And I thought, oh, she's going to say, no, that's not true. And she said, it's true. A lot of them do. Where's the exit? And she said, but they don't get drunk because they become alcoholism counselors. They get drunk because they stop going to meetings for themselves. They go with patients, or they go with the treatment center, or they go, And so I would say the same, for people in the wonderful work that you're doing in the Ignatian spirituality program, that you're taking care of yourself, that you're being fed yourself, so that you have something to give to others. If you're in a 12-step program, that you are going for yourself and you're, tending to your own recovery. And I'm going to end with showing a little video, cue to Matthew and Jim. In this video, I'm going to show you, I did Jeff referred to the retreats they do for the folks who have been through guest house. And I did one on Zoom a few years ago for some sisters who had gone through guest house, who were alums of guest house. And it was a delightful retreat, and I enjoyed it. And I showed this video as part of it. And when the retreat was over, and they sent me the feedback forms, this got so much attention. I felt like I should have shared my stipend with this kid. But it's a reminder to us, what do we practice? And that all of us have in this spirituality that we've immersed ourselves in, we have what we need, and we just need to keep practicing it. So I'll just end my part with this little fellow, and to you, Jim.
So my question to you today is, what do you practice every day? What do you practice? Because what you practice, you will get good at. What do you practice? Do you practice joy in your life? Do you practice peace in your life? Do you practice happiness in your life? Or do you practice a lot of complaining? Because if you complain, you will get very good at it. And you will get so good at it that you will find fault with everything. Even when there's no fault that a layman cannot see, you, being an expert, will see it. What do you practice? Do you practice anger? Because if you practice anger, you will get very good at it. And you will get so good at it that the most trivial you'll think, trivial thing will make you angry. Like sitting in an airplane and watching the sea across from you somehow looks better than the one you've been given. And that is so unfair of the airlines. What do you practice? Do you practice being worried? Because if you practice being worried, you will get very good at it. And you will get so good at it that everything will worry you, including the buffalo you don't have. So I propose, if this is true that it's a question of practice, then I propose you practice joy.
Oh, we can't hear you, sister. Your last comments here on
Oh,
mute. There you
I
go.
was just saying, he's my little sidekick, and I think it's a wonderful question. What do we practice?
Excellent. Thank you so much, sister. My first reaction is we keep a timeline of how the flow of these presentations is supposed to go. And I realized a few minutes ago, I was like, oh wait, she's way over time. Should I I was like, no,
All
this
right.
time just went by. Like I was totally absorbed in everything and every story you were telling. Um, we're going to open it up for some questions, and again, for everybody listening, if you have a question you want to put it in the Q&A feature, please do. If you have any trouble with that, add it to the chat and we'll try to address everybody. I'm going to start with just a couple of questions filtered through my own shared experience with you as a teacher. My 3 decades of teaching, these two questions are filtered through that. So first, your sense of humor. I learned as a teacher that humor is its origins come from a couple of places with the students I had. One was a deep place of insecurity and obfuscation. The other is what you were talking about, and I think is very true of you, a sense of humility. We had the staff had a text chat going while you were talking every time we chuckled out loud. And so we appreciate your sense of humor. But one of the questions that came up for us was, how is humor a part of your recovery story? Do you find humor and joy in your recovery and your work now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the humor probably is family. I mean, I used to say that Norman Lear got paid millions to write scripts you could have heard around our kitchen table. And some of it was that the humor was covering up stuff, or the humor could have taken that sarcastic bent at times. But I do think part of it is, my mother had a sense of humor. And uh, my brothers and sisters definitely, some more than others. Um, and I guess, yeah, as a teacher, I found humor was a good tool. I think, the word humor comes from the same root as human and humility. So, there's something there. And and I think that, um I think what the 12-step spirituality has brought me is this ability to not take myself so seriously, that, and I think when we can see the absurdity in some things, or the contradictions in things, or the paradoxes.
Yeah. Well, I think we really appreciated your authenticity that you shown through your humor and telling very raw, honest stories flavored with humor makes it very relatable. Another one I'll filter through my own experience as a teacher. I was a theology teacher for a while, and uh, I remember students always coming and they would talk about some loss, some uh, damage, some trauma, some struggle. And oftentimes those are really very real. Oftentimes for a 17-year-old, I question, how real is this? Like, talking about the death of your grandma's cat or something like that. I'm like, okay, I guess that's sad. But what I always was aware of was how angry young people got at God for these traumas and these challenges. I was listening to you tonight thinking, as a spiritual director, I ask people to pray with Psalm 139 all the time, and how God knew us and created us in our mother's womb, knows everything about us. I don't think God afflicts us with these things to test us and to try our souls, but God does present us with struggle. So
Mm.
I wanted to know more about your relationship with God. You said that you felt you were invited to follow God through your recovery. Can you talk more about your own spirituality of struggle?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think what I recall, not just I think about, but what I recall when I was drinking and was struggling with, um, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to do this again. And then what Jeff spoke about, that feeling of, oh, I've done it again. I don't know if I use the words let God down, but just, I failed. I'm a failure. The uh that whole thing. I didn't stop praying. I was reading all the good holy books back in the 70s. I was reading Henry Nouwen and John Powell and Edward Farrell and all these wonderful writers, and wanting, like, yeah, I believe this. And then my life was a mess inside. And and I do believe, I was calling out to God for help. And the answer that I didn't want to hear was go to AA. That was the answer. Um, but it's interesting you say Psalm 139, that had become very important to me. And along the line of the humor, I also I gave my mother a copy of, it was back in the 70s, a Good News for Modern Man. It was a modern translation of the Gospels and the Psalms. And I told her that Psalm 139 was my favorite. And so after that, when I was home, she and I would pray that psalm together. And one time, it was actually probably was during that visit to Utica, but anyway, I we were leaving each other for the day, and I one of us said, "Shall we pray the psalm?" And she got it out, and 139. That'd be a good number to play, Cathy. So I come by the humor, honestly. It was like, very irreverent kind of approach to it. But that Psalm 139 of God creating me, knowing everything, and loving me. That had been part of the spirituality that I was getting in my training, in my spiritual direction. At that time, and certainly a Franciscan approach to a loving God. And then I was struggling with it because I had enough of the old "you've got to measure up" kind of thing, that it was a struggle. But that was always there, and I'd go back to it and just praying, "God, you help me, you help me." And I believe the help came when I was able to face the alcoholism.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing. Just a reminder to folks, if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A or in the chat. Moving on, one of the questions that came up, you were talking a lot about your own memories of growing up in what seemed very familiar to probably a lot of us, good, Northeastern, probably blue collar, setting and family. Um, and drinking played a big part in that, your family experience. How did your relationship change with your family as you began your recovery journey, as it was then and has become?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, there were two in my family, my brother and an aunt who were in AA, and my brother lived in South Africa at the time, and so he was thrilled when I told him that I was going to AA. He ended up dying of alcoholism. He got sober 5 years before I did, was sober 13. Number of things came together, grief that wasn't dealt with, using medication and not talking about it, not using it the way it was supposed to be used and not talking about it. And he ended up drinking again and was dead at 57. And so my relationship with my brother and my aunt who were in AA was obviously very good. And the others, when I told them, it was like, oh, okay, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal. And by that time, my mother had some kind of senile dementia, and if I told her, I think I did tell her about it, and she was like, "Hey, whatever," you know. She didn't,
Mhm.
she didn't think it was a
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. Families have a very sometimes skewed relationship based on our culture and our
Mhm.
family's history. Related to that, and you made several references to your status as a religious sister, and some funny comments. I was telling one of my colleagues, "You're the fun nun," and we used to talk about it in school. Um, but similar to your relationship with your family, how did your addiction, your alcoholism, and your recovery influence your relationship with your religious community?
I belong to a community that really has been wonderful about getting people help, and uh, I had a friend. Well, she's since died, but she belonged to another religious community, and she would go to treatment, and then when she came back from treatment, they would say to her, "You can't go to meetings. We don't want you being, where people are going to see you." And they encourage you to stay in touch with the treatment center or whatever. But she couldn't stay sober. And she finally left her community and then had many years of sobriety. And that wasn't my experience when I told the person in charge at the time that I had started going to AA. Her first thing was, "Do you want to go to treatment?" And I was like, "No." That's why I'm going to AA. I didn't want to. Now, looking back, had I gone to treatment, I think I would have dealt with a lot of things sooner and with a lot more support, but it's just not part of my story now. But that was the kind of support I had. And then, I was very careful about who I told at first. And then there were a few of us who were recovering who put it in a newsletter one time, if you have any questions and want to. And people's response was, that anything that was said to me, now I don't know what was said otherwise, but was supportive, and yeah, yeah.
Mhm. And related to that, I don't know if you were with us last night listening to Bill Schmidt.
Hmm.
Um, he talked for a while about his own distinction between guilt and shame,
Mm,
and guilt and shame, certainly associated with addiction and how we process it. How does that affect you as a religious person? Like, is there a different sense of guilt and shame that you carry as someone who's identified as a vowed religious,
mm.
that get in the way? Does that help you in relating to other religious or relating to lay people?
I think for me, like the distinction between guilt, the feelings I have about doing something, that I've done something bad or I've done something wrong, as opposed to shame is I am bad or I am wrong. Um, that I've got help with that in therapy and in, talking with other people. Um, was it stronger because I'm a sister? I don't know. I mean, I certainly, worked with lots of young women or women younger than me, which is just about everyone now, um, with, severe feelings of shame over how they were with their children or whatever. So I don't know what other people's experience is. I know what mine was. And certainly there was a lot of emphasis on, doing what you have to do to let that go and in not having it define you. We are more than our disease of alcoholism. We are more than our addiction to drugs. We are more than our eating disorder or our gambling addiction or our sex addiction. We're more than that. And so that has helped me over the years. And then being with other people. It's like, there's a line in the big book, "We won't regret the past, no wish to shut the door on it." And someone once said, yeah, that was written by a man who wasn't a woman with little kids and feels, she regrets it, So,
Yeah.
regrets, quote Sinatra, I've had a few, and it's like, but we don't live there. And I think that's where the day at a time, what can I do today? How can I be today? Is what's extremely important.
Mhm. We have a question someone submitted, and they preface it by saying they want to ask this respectfully, but I think it's a good question. You talked about, your own first revelations with uh, sponsors, with spiritual directors, with family. But when you listen to other people now, are you ever surprised when someone tells you that they're an alcoholic? It seems like people in recovery sometimes have a sense of this or something, kind of like a radar.
Mm. I don't trust my radar too much. Am I guess I'm not sure what the question is. Am I sometimes surprised when someone tells me
Yeah.
they're struggling with alcoholism? Yes. Now that yeah, I've been very surprised. Very good friend of mine. We've been, it's a couple and, for years. And I was away. I was in Ireland for a while, a few years back, and I got a message as the wife wanted to talk to me. And I was in Ireland. I couldn't, I emailed and said what was going on. And he was in treatment for alcoholism down in Naples someplace. And that shocked me. I had never picked it up. And we had been out to meals together and that I had never picked it up. So
Mm,
yeah, I can be surprised.
yeah. You Another question. You had talked about 12 steps as um, an avenue for spirituality that's grounded and down to earth. It's something about humility and surrender, love and service, as you've shown through, talking about the variety of steps. Um, that sounds a lot like what the church is trying to embody as well. Do you ever use the 12 steps in ministry outside of the recovery community?
Well, I think because I've, you know, been immersed in the 12 steps, if you will, for all these years, it influences, how I talk and what I say. Um, but I don't, like quote them in a setting where people would not be familiar with them. Um, but yeah, it definitely influences how I approach, um, you know,
Yeah.
lots of things. Yeah.
I think it's
I don't know if
related.
that answers your question, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it relates to we use this term recovery is for everyone in
Mhm.
ISP. Not to ever say that all of us are in recovery because it's a very different statement. But recovery is something that sometimes people don't even know explicitly. And as we minister to people, it can be a place of, the 12 steps, recovery philosophy is a way we can relate to people who deal with, as we said, their spirituality in struggle,
Mhm.
even if it doesn't involve addiction explicitly. Um, one of our questions from one of our ISP members referenced your experience in Boston and your ongoing ministry now. Do you feel like you have a better understanding of what and how to minister to those who have been unhoused, those who are struggling with addiction? Um, can you comment on your ways and means of doing so?
Well, I wish I had gotten involved with ISP. You know, that I think you've gotten a way of doing that I didn't have. And uh, so I don't know as that's developed over the years. I mean, I was in Boston from 86 to 89, and some of that I was working in a hospital. So the rest of it was in the um, St. Francis House. Um, but you know, with people in who are coming, say, to the sisters' house, the women, and it's just that whole idea of presence and listening to people's stories and sharing our own and sharing the wealth of the goodness that we have from the 12-step spirituality and from, you know, my own experience as a Franciscan. That spirituality is what I share. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm sure some Ignatian stuff thrown in there just for good luck.
Well, I think our Franciscan and Ignatian paths certainly parallel, if not cross.
Yeah.
So, one thing as we're running out of time, and there are more questions and lots of comments from people who are just very grateful for what you said here. Um, we, you talked a lot about your own experience, your past history, and your memories. Maybe take a moment just to talk about what your current ministry at the Sister's House is like. You talked about it not being a halfway house, but a safe place for women in recovery. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit, give us a flavor of what a day is like at the Sister's House.
Yeah. Um, well, the, as you mentioned in the introduction, it's a former convent that in 2018, when the last two sisters left, the people in charge said, does anyone have any ideas for using it? So I got together some women in AA and Al-Anon and other 12-step programs and said, you know, how could we use this? And that's what we came up with, was a place. It's not residential. I think I had said to you on the phone, I didn't want to work that hard. I didn't want to get licensed. I didn't want to have to be, you know, ADA compliant and all that. But it's a place where women can come. So, for example, on Monday, when I went over there, there was an Al-Anon meeting at noontime. So there was a group of women that came in for that. A couple of them stayed for lunch afterwards. Someone might stop in and use the library. We have a library there. There's one woman who comes and does centering prayer in the chapel every Tuesday afternoon religiously by herself. Sometimes some women will come, like a sponsor and sponsee, to do some step work, and it's nice. It's a beautiful porch. We're right on the river. It's quite lovely. And so every day is different. But there are some scheduled things like the Al-Anon meeting Tuesday night. There's a um 12 and 12 meeting. Wednesday noon, there's an AA meeting. Thursday night, there's a Al-Anon meeting on Zoom. Sunday, there's a huge meeting of young women that I just, when I go, I feel like I should get arrested for trespassing because they're all so young and I'm not. But it's really wonderful to see, this place that was a convent where, kind of wasn't used to seeing all these young people with tattoos and piercings and, you know,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. Yeah. So every day is different and sometimes someone just wants to sit and talk. And so I'm there for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds wonderful and vibrant. Thank you for that ministry. One person, Kristen, one of our listeners, asks, how can we pray for you? And specifically, how can we pray for your work at the Sisters House?
Well, thank you, Kristen, for that question. I looked down to, I can't read them all, but I did see that. That I have knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry it out, I guess is what I would I'd be grateful for. And certainly I have for a long time had great admiration for the uh, Ignatian Spirituality Project, and we'll continue to pray for you. So.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Maybe one last question because it keeps coming up. Is there an author, a spiritual leader that you would recommend to us that helps you keep grounded or inspires you?
Well, Bill mentioned last night, Richard Rohr's Breathing Underwater is, just really a, a classic, I think. And Jeff mentioned Merton, that whole thing of searching and being open to God and finding God and, not having all the answers. That wonderful quote that we see often is, I don't know where I'm going and I don't know, the fact that I'm trying to please you doesn't, that kind of honesty before God has been influenced. Jim Habro has a book, the 12 Steps and the Spiritual Exercises, that I found helpful. And the literature that comes out of the 12-step programs, I think one of the best conference approved books that came out was NA's It Works, How and Why, which is kind of like the uh, comparable to the AA 12 and 12. It goes through the steps and the traditions, and very, very well done. I find that really helpful. Al-Anon literature, and I think Al-Anon, to anyone who's doing the kind of work you all are doing, could be very, very helpful. It's because, we realize that we're powerless and we don't get people sober. We don't transform people. God does that and uses us. But we, to know our own limitations. Al-Anon helps me with that.
Well, with that, we're going to take a lot of words of wisdom, great ideas, some amazing memories, some laughter. Sister Cathy, thank you so much for helping us tonight and sharing of yourself. And we just wish you tons of blessings and great work for all that you do. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.